Judge people on the basis of their behavior and what they say to you, not on the basis of anything as silly as nationality. That's as silly as racism. The ideal that I stand for, and the ideal that I put forth in that Facebook message, is one of teaching students to think critically. And critical thinking is, the holy mantra of universities. That's what I've always been told here. That's what we should be doing. And what that means to me, and I think generally, is to give a multiplicity of different points of view, evidence, and let students decide for themselves what they want to think. That's key. Now, what does that mean specifically? I taught a class called Culture of Hong Kong last fall. And a little bit of a touchy topic, obviously, in Hong Kong today, because when you deal with culture of Hong Kong, you've got to deal with things like protests. So the question I ask students in the exam is, explain Hong Kong as based in a culture of protest over the last 20 years from multiple perspectives, including the mainland perspective. I mean, we need to know how these protests can be looked at. Obviously from protesters' points of view, but also how would the mainland look at it? Now, the way students were to answer the question is, the first 85% of your answer, give different points of view. Give 4 or 5 different points of view, at different angles. Then it's okay if you give your own reasoned conclusion. And a student who didn't give a mainland point of view as well as a Hong Kong point of view got a lower grade. One question I ask in another of my classes is meanings of life is, I am paid more than the person who cleans the toilets here. Why? That's a pretty interesting question to ask, and let's look at this from multiple points of view. You could say, well, you have a PhD, yeah, but that shouldn't matter, maybe. On the other hand, her job is less fun than mine, so why should she make, and I know the person who cleans toilets, so I'm calling her by her gender, why should she make less money than I do? Why should she make, probably 10 times less money than I do? Why? What's going on here? Is this just? And then we will argue about this back and forth. This is a part of critical thinking, and this is a way to get students to really think about their society. That's what education is, I think. And as you can tell, I'm really passionate about this. One of the things that I did that I'm most proud of is when the protests were taking place in 2019, I set up various meetings between our undergraduate Hong Kong students and mainland MA students to talk. And they may not agree, they often didn't agree, but nonetheless, if they can talk civilly, that's what's really important about education. You take somebody with different values than you and you talk civilly. This is what education is all about. One thing I remember that made me sad was the extent to which some of my mainland students felt really excluded. They felt like they were the new ethnic minority in Hong Kong, and that's indeed happened. It used to be that the Africans I know back 10 or 15 years ago would feel really isolated in Hong Kong. I don't hear that so much anymore. Instead, it's some of the mainland students, especially if their English isn't so good and they don't speak Cantonese. It's often hard for them. And that's kind of sad to hear. The message I would give all of my students is, look, you cannot ever assign blame for anybody because of the government they happen to live under. Judge people on the basis of their behavior and what they say to you, not on the basis of anything as silly as nationality. That's as silly as racism. Certainly some people felt that the mainland was dominating Hong Kong to a great degree, but again, that is more a governmental aspect than it is people, and you can't criticize people for the actions of their governments. I got in a bit of a problem on an RTHK program, a radio program, a number of months ago, because I mentioned that when I'm in the US, if I am followed by a young black person in a hood, and it's midnight, it's late at night, I will be a little more frightened than if I'm followed by a white person in a suit and tie. And I was accused of being racist. Maybe it was racist, and I apologize because it is racist. On the other hand, statistically, I felt I would be more likely to be robbed by the black guy. Now, the black guest on the program then said, yeah, if I'm followed by a young white guy in a beard, I'm going to be much more afraid than by a black guy in a suit and tie. Yes, he was absolutely right too. So there is this underlying racism that's difficult to get rid of. all I can say is the same idealistic thing I try to say to students, namely that, remember, people are people apart from nationality, apart from skin color, apart from gender, apart from any other attribute they happen to be born into. And by the way, discrimination, gender discrimination is obviously just as bad as racial discrimination. These are all forms of discrimination. Just take people as people. So too, the one big form of discrimination is discrimination on the basis of looks, beauty discrimination. We don't talk much about that, but that is an enormous form of discrimination. And you should treat people the same regardless of how they look. So these are all forms of discrimination, and we shouldn't practice them as humans. Unfortunately, we do, but all we can do is what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, do all we can to counter them. I think we also need to be honest, though, because dishonesty is just as much a form of, is a worse form of racism. I remember, I believe it was Malcolm X, saying something to the effect that at least, maybe it wasn't him, but it was some prominent civil rights leader, saying that at least when Southern whites discriminate against blacks, you can understand it. Northern whites pretend like they don't, but really they do. Really, that's what they feel. That's a more dangerous form of discrimination. So if you do feel this discrimination, yeah, it's important to own up to it and speak it, and then that's a way of helping to overcome it.